Welcome everybody to Cayman Connection's book club event. We are very, very excited about this event, and we have been much anticipating being able to talk to the fabulous Sara Collins, who joins us today. So firstly, I would like to say thank you so much for all members for coming, and for those members who'll be watching later. We know you wanted to be here, but we understand that that's not always possible live. So we're excited to be able to share this event to and for you. So just a little bit about Cayman Connection for anyone that might not know. My name is Kandiah. I'm the founder and board director for Cayman Connection. We were established nearly 12 years ago now, and we are a network for Caymanians and friends of the Cayman Islands, associates of the Cayman Islands, who now live and travel and study overseas. So we're a diaspora network for all things Cayman around the world. We are all connected by a history, a connection, an identity with the Cayman Islands wherever we are. We hold it in our hearts in one way or another, and that's why we're all here. So we like to celebrate everything to do with the Cayman Islands where we can, and what it's meant to us. And most importantly, we like to celebrate those who have had experience with Cayman, either from Cayman or spent time in Cayman, and where that's taken them, and how that has infiltrated some way or not into what they've done later on in their lives and their career. So that's who we are. We support also students who come across to different parts of the world to study, keep them connected to home, keep them connected to professionals who might be able to help them along their journey, and just always keep Caymankind in your heart, really. So that's us. I want to just have a quick internal thank you to Rita Estevanovic here, our programs manager, who puts our programs together, particularly with such a cultural element here. It's really fantastic, so thank you. And our executive director, Ashley Smith, who will be joining shortly, who's leading all of our day-to-day operations and making sure that the organization runs smoothly. So we have lots of things we do at Cayman Connection, and I can't talk about all of them, unfortunately. I would love to, but book club, am I allowed to say it's one of my favorite? I'm not sure I should say that, but it is. Book club is fantastic, and we discuss all kinds of diasporic literature, Caribbean literature, and it's a time where we can come together and share our own identities through authors, through stories, and it's great fun. So I am going to hand over to our amazing book club lead, Antonio Arch, who has led us through lots of books, and we're learning all the time, and he can tell us a little bit about himself and introduce our fantastic guest speaker, Sara. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Kate. That was, yeah, we are a very sort of cohesive, interesting, unique group of book lovers, bound together by everything Caymanian. And sorry, I had to run up 2 flights of stairs to grab my notes.
I caught you.
Rita, are you still here? Can you read that warning, content warning for me?
I can do that. I can do
Can
that.
you?
I've got it right here. I was going to, no problem. I wanted to say, as part of being recorded, and as part of what we do, we as Cayman Connection are committed to creating a safe and welcoming programs, events, and content. So we want to be sensitive to a topic's potential cause for emotional or psychological distress in members. So this is a bit of a content warning, because we have mature content here that we'll be discussing tonight. So we do want to say that we are aware. We are all mental health first aiders. We have a mental health page for any distress that might be caused in any of the topics. Some people have shared their feedback. But our content warnings are not to be used as a censor on discussion. We want to discuss openly and freely, and it's important that we do, discuss how we feel about things and what it might bring up in us. But we just want to say we are aware of anyone managing anxiety and preparing to engage with potentially distressing material to avoid distress. So Some formalities, just to say tonight's discussion may reference slavery and trauma, racism, shadism, eugenics and mutilation, drug misuse and addiction, child physical, sexual and racially motivated abuse. It's big and it's meaty, but it's important that we talk about these things. And I thank all authors and those who are willing to put that out there so that we can be open and speak about these things. But we are also very cognizant of those who it might cause distress. So we wanted to share that. And thank you, Antonia, for helping us with recognizing that we should say that.
Thanks for reading it. If you have comments, feedback, or we're looking for a referral or counseling or any sort of information on tonight, please contact us at hello@caymanconnection.org or contact your local health authority.
Lovely.
If you've read the book, you understand the content warning, and I don't want to go and read the back of the book flap to read the bio. And I just want to start to say, welcome, Sara Collins, and it's so nice to have you here.
Lovely to be here.
It's been a big couple of years for you.
Mm-hmm.
And what's it been like? A meta description of what all of this has been meant to you.
Oh, first of all, can I just say how delighted I am to be connected with a Cayman Connection, because I spend my days mostly writing alone in London. I see in particular Jazz Pitcairn, who is a sort of dear young lady to me who I watched grow up and who I am watching in admiration as she does great things in industry. And I'm sure, I can't see anyone else, but I'm sure there are a lot other young Caymanians who, you know, it is so wonderful to connect with. I had this feeling the other night. I went out to a dinner that was being hosted by a producer. There was another screenwriter there who I hadn't met, but as soon as I sat down, I heard her say a few words and I said, I detect an accent. And she said she was from Bermuda, and my skin catch a fire, as they would say in Jamaica. It's just that feeling which I have every time I run into a fellow small island person in London, that the connection is really warming and electrifying and just reminds me of home. So it's lovely to feel a little bit like I'm at home now. My journey with Frannie, I mean, I guess if there are writers and aspiring writers on the call, you will recognize a lot of this, because I think many of us come to writing the same way. You know, I was one of those kids that fell in love with books really young. I read everywhere. You know, I read while walking, I read while waiting in line, I read behind the covers of my textbooks in class. I read early and I read often and I read everything. And I feel like I have always wanted to write. I remember always wanting to write, but I am really struck now, having kind of entered the publishing industry as a writer, by the fact that there were no examples really in Cayman of people following a route in traditional publishing and becoming novelists. And it just didn't seem like something that was open to me. It didn't seem like something that one did as a career, or that anyone I knew as a young person in Cayman was encouraged to do as a career. I really hope that's changed. And I would love to hear from some of the young people on the call whether it has. So I did law instead, and I kind of thought of law as a solid, safe money-making option for many years, until my kids grew up. And when my youngest child was at high school, I decided to do a creative writing master's. And again, this was on a whim. I didn't have any plans of making writing a career, but I did a creative writing master's at Cambridge. We had, those of you who have done MFAs or equivalent degrees will know you have to do a dissertation, which, you know, part of it's a creative work. And I submitted the first few chapters of Frannie, thought nothing of it, but then I entered it again on a whim in a competition, a Cambridge competition for unpublished manuscripts. And to my surprise, it was shortlisted. My agent was one of the judges, and she signed me. I didn't actually even query with it, so I didn't go the traditional route. She signed me. You know, we worked together to finish it within, you know, I got a lot of editorial feedback from her. And then when it was finished and submitted, it was on the verge of going to I think it was a 13-way auction, when we got a really wonderful preempt, that's an offer from a publishing company to kind of take it off the table for other companies. from Penguin in the UK, and then from HarperCollins in the US and Canada. And it was published in 2019. So it's now been, since then, it's been published in, I think it's 14 languages. So it's been sold for translation. It won the Costa First Novel Award, which really put it on the map here. That's a very prestigious award in the UK. It was a Waterstones Book of the Month, and it was a Barnes and Noble Book of the Month. It was an Oprah selection, not a book club pick, but it was an Oprah selection for one of her magazine's books of the summer. So I was flown over to New York to do a photo shoot for Oprah and J. Jill with lots of fantastic writers, like Nicole Dennis Benn, another great Caribbean writer. And it has really just been surreal. It's been one of those things you dream of when you think, yeah, I want to be a novelist, and this is what a novelist life is like. But I never expected any of it. It's been fantastic. It was also optioned for screen, and I adapted it for screen myself. So it aired earlier this year on ITV in March, and was very well reviewed. And the process of adapting it almost killed me, but I am now also writing screenplays as well.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
What I'm hearing is that your success with Frannie is not something that happened overnight. It wasn't the typical story of, oh, I was discovered by an agent. Frannie was obviously an enormous undertaking.
It was, and I think it's important to emphasize that it didn't happen overnight. I think the thing that we who have finished a writing project know that people who only want to do one don't know is that the difference between languishing undiscovered and successful publication really is hard work. It takes a tremendous amount of discipline to get something written, and that is something that came as a complete surprise to me. So Frannie involved it involved working on it for the year during my dissertation, which was incredibly difficult work, but then also devoting myself to it for 2 years afterwards. And I like to say, people think that this is an exaggeration, but I only had 2 complete days off in that entire 2-year period. I did not take any time off from writing the novel. It really was mentally and physically quite a challenge.
Wow.
The other work I think that's required, and I don't think it's work that ever stops, is the work of enduring rejection, which maybe aspiring writers will be familiar with as well. That, I was lucky. Although it was a lot of hard work, in many ways, it was kind of a fairy tale, because I didn't have to sort of weather the storm of rejection with this. It got picked up quite quickly. But I have since, on the journey, I'm trying to get several TV projects made now, and I've since had to kind of accustom myself to the fact that part of being a professional writer is knowing professionally how to deal with the fact that not everything you write will have that level of success, and being able to adjust yourself to that, to process it, and to move on, and to stay dedicated to the work in spite of it.
Amazing. I'll probably jump in here just to say, I think you've got something you might want to read, and
yeah, sure.
We've got so much to say. We've got so much to talk about. We're very excited. So we'd love to hear what you have. Just before you start, I'd just like to say to all members and everybody here, we do have a lot of questions. There'll be a lot of discussions, but please do feel free once we're in the discussion section to let us know your questions in the chat, or we'll also have an opportunity to open the floor for questions as well. So please do check in on the chat to everybody. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll also be hearing from you. So thank you.
Right. So I will just summarize very briefly what the book is about. I'm assuming some people have read it, but Frannie is a young Jamaican woman who is brought to London in the early 19th century. She's given as a gift. She's brought to London from Jamaica in the early 19th century, and she's given as a gift to work as a maid in the Mayfair mansion of George Benham and his wife, Marguerite. While there, she begins a passionate love affair with Marguerite, and that ends in tragedy, which is not a spoiler. When the book starts, she's just about to begin her trial. She's been arrested for the double murders of Marguerite and George Benham, who have been found stabbed to death in the house. And I'm going to read initially from the very opening of the book. So this is chapter 1. My trial starts the way my life did, a squall of elbows and shoving and spit. From the prisoner's hold, they take me through the gallery, down the stairs, and past the table crawling with barristers and clerks. Around me, a river of faces in flood, their mutters rising, blending with the lawyer's whispers. A noise that hums with all the spite of bees in a bush. Heads turn as I enter, every eye a skewer. I duck my head, parrot my boots, grip my hands to stop their awful trembling. It seems all of London is here, but then murder is the story this city likes best. All of them swollen into the same mood, all of them in a stir about the sensation excited by these most ferocious murders. Those were the words of the Morning Chronicle, itself in the business of harvesting that very sensation like an ink black crop. I don't make a habit of reading what the broadsheets say about me, for newspapers are like a mirror I saw once in a fair near the Strand that stretched my reflection like a rack, gave me two heads, so I almost didn't know myself. If you've ever had the misfortune to be written about, you know what I mean. But there are turnkeys at Newgate who read them at you for sport, precious little you can do to get away. When they see I'm not moving, they shove me forward with the flats of their hands, and I shiver despite the heat, fumble my way down the steps. Murderer, the word follows me. Murderer, the mulatta murderess. I'm forced to trot to keep up with the turnkeys so I don't tumble crown over ankle. Fear skitters up my throat as they push me into the dock. The barristers look up from their table, idle as cattle in their mournful gowns. Even those old hacks who've seen it all want a glimpse of the mulatta murderess. Even the judge stares, fat and glossy in his robes, his face soft and blank as an old potato, until he screws his eyes on me and nods at his limp-haired clerk to read the indictment. And then I'm just going to skip forward slightly. Frannie's heard the indictment read. She's watched the prosecutor start his opening statement and laying out the evidence against her. And she's about to be carried away on a wave of memory. A wave of memory breaks. She's lying in bed, up on her elbows with her toes pointing into the air. In her hand, an apple I'm trying in vain to coax her to eat. Listen, are you listening? She kicks one of her heels. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies. I'm only half listening because it is impossible, this thing that is happening, my mistress lying with me in her bed and reading me a poem. But also because it was one of those times when it fell to me to watch what they called the balance of her mind, like a pot I had on the stove. Is she well? I'm asking myself. Is she well? She turns to me. Do you like it? Who is it? I ask, stirring her hair with my breath. Shelley, though I like Byron better, don't you? The prince of melodrama. She turns over suddenly onto her back and closes her eyes. Byron is proof, if ever it were needed, that a man is merely spoiled by his vices, while a woman is soiled by hers. Oh, Francis, don't you think everyone should be prescribed a poem a day? Woman cannot live on novels alone. She was right about that. A novel is like a long, warm drink, but a poem is a spike through the head. And that's the opening.
Thank you. Thank you. I had lots of, there's so much there, as there is in the whole book. And I'm interested and glad that you started with the opening, because actually Antonia and I have talked about that, and we've talked about openings of novels and how relevant and important they are. And how did you say it, Antonia? It was brilliant. It was
I said once every decade or so you come across a book that you open, and the first sentence of the first page of the first chapter, you know you're in for something enormous. And if it's a classic, you know it was a big deal, it was a big hit because we're still reading it. But if it's a new book and that very first sentence stands out to you, you can still remember it years later, you know that whoever's written this is going to have a very exciting future ahead.
I love that. I actually am obsessed with opening lines. You know, I don't know if anyone else does this, but I will sometimes just read opening lines. You know, there are lots of good compendiums online, because you're right. There's something about a good opening line that can stand the test of time, that tells you you're in the hands of a master. It kind of encapsulates the whole novel somehow. It sets the tone. It gives you the feeling. It foreshadows the best one I've come across recently was in a novel that was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, which was just awarded on Sunday. The novel didn't win, but it was called The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. And the opening line was something like, "In the next town over, a man had killed his family." And if you read the novel, it keeps sort of circling back to that line in such sort of profound and subtle ways that it kind of builds in power the more you go through it. And it's very simple. It's not overwritten. There isn't any fancy language. So it's all very simple, you know, almost monosyllabic words. "In the next town over, a man had killed his family." It's a very matter-of-fact line, but so powerful, and really kind of opens the door to the novel.
Amazing. And with storytelling, I mean, opening the door to a story, having such a strong start really kind of emphasizes your need to show how important writing is and how important storytelling is. And throughout the novel, I obviously very much felt you know, the references to literature, the references to writers, and retelling your story, and sort of taking control, I guess, of your life through storytelling, and not your life, but the narrator's life. And that sort of string and theme throughout, being a book lover and a literature lover myself, was really significant to me. And there were a couple of things that really stood out about those writing, a couple of quotes which I kind of resonated with me a little after. One of them was when Frannie was walking and started to talk very openly and freely with Madame, and about how she was so well read, and she sort of started flowing into this you know, the importance of reading. And then afterwards, I think it was she felt a fool. She said she'd made a fool of herself. She thought I've made a fool of myself, but I also felt a weight spilling out of me. And I thought that was really interesting, because, you know, even translating that into today's life, you know, even, I mean, that's how I feel when I put a post up on social media, you know. And it was like, it was really interesting as a writer, you're sharing so much, and then you're like, oh God, have I shared too much? But actually I feel so good for sharing all that. And it was a real moment, and it felt very natural for me, and it was a real, that was one of the.
But it's also that feeling, isn't it, when you have a crush on someone, and that crush kind of makes you very garrulous. The crush opens you up, and then afterwards you second guess everything that you've been saying, you know, everything that you said, and did I make a fool of myself? Which she very much has that feeling about Madame as well. To me, what was interesting is that her feelings about Madame were really similar to her feelings about reading, and they're both kind of feelings of love and excitement and attraction, but also fulfillment. Something about the way it allows her to see herself and express herself. Both the love affair and what she describes as a love affair with reading do that for her. They give her a sense of self and a sense of her own self-esteem.
It's really interesting. I hadn't quite spotted that, but it is, because it's also something not quite allowed, really, not only as a slave or a servant to be learned, but also as a woman even, and, you know, to fall in love with your mistress is something that's not accepted. So actually she's in love with those both things, and they're both sort of in some way not quite you know, acceptable in that sense. So that's really interesting. We've got a couple of questions coming in. Just the other one that ties into that about writing that was I wanted to ask you about was the quote that says, "The trouble with writers is that they spend their lives trying to lie to themselves." So I'm asking you about that.
Yeah.
You?
It's interesting because Frannie says that at some point, and actually she means the opposite, because part of her journey in the novel is figuring out actually that telling her own story is the only way that she can actually exert any agency over herself. You know, the novel for me, a big part of it, and maybe the bit that's autobiographical, because I am not a double murderer, nor a suspected double murderer, have never been enslaved, but there's a kind of heartbeat of the novel that was very autobiographical for me, and it was this relationship with books and reading. And I think the thing she learns is that in a life which gives a young Black woman very little power or regard or agency in the world. And unfortunately, I think that's still true. I still grew up feeling very much on the margins of things as a young Black Caribbean girl, that one of the few things you can do where the power will be entirely yours is tell your own story. And part of that for her actually does involve truth telling. So there's another part where she says, I think in that same conversation you alluded to a few minutes ago with Madame, that part of the magic of reading is that the world is shapeless, but books try to impose some shape on it. And so that is what she's getting at, that in a way her life has been chaotic, it's involved a lot of suffering. There's been no shape to it because no one has ascribed any value to it. And so writing is her way of doing that, but it's also her way of trying to get at a particular truth. And I think the point she's making about lying to yourself is actually that you can, when you sit down to impose shape on something, it forces you to think about something that's true, which is not the same as factual. So fiction obviously isn't fact. But for me, there's something true in any good piece of writing. And that's actually, she's saying one thing, but she means the opposite of that.
Interesting. Great. So we have some questions from the floor. I'm going to start with Sheila, who's here with us. Sheila has said, "Hi, Sara. I've been following your work, the book and TV series. Thank you for creating such a brilliant piece of work. Please tell us about the main difficulties you had with the screenwriting aspects. Did you have to take a course or get a screenwriting mentor?" I know there's a lot of interest in this, and certainly things that we're going to touch on. So thank you, Sheila, for your question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sheila. I didn't take a course. I didn't have time to take a course because I stumbled into screenwriting. I really wanted to be a novelist. And as you heard, I took a quite sort of well thought out route. I did a degree, I worked on a dissertation, I had read novels all my life, so I felt I'd been preparing for it all my life. I didn't have the same approach to screenwriting. It wasn't a goal of mine. It wasn't something I'd set out to do. But when the book was optioned for television, the producers who optioned it asked me if I would like to write the screenplays myself. And I was pretty floored by that, because anyone who has tried to get into screenwriting knows doors don't usually open that way. I thought, I don't know anything about screenwriting, but I should try to do this because people don't get these kinds of offers all the time. And so I had never even read a screenplay before I wrote the screenplays for Frannie. So the first thing I did was just go online. Luckily, I discovered that unlike novels, you don't have to pay for screenplays, and there are hundreds of them available to read for free online. And so I did. I mean, a couple that I remember being really helpful were Chariots of Fire, which is a brilliant screenplay. The screenplay for Jane Eyre, the latest movie adaptation. I can't remember who wrote it, but the one that had Michael Fassbender in it. And the screenplay for A Beautiful Mind, which is just a gorgeous screenplay. There are some that are in my pantheon of favorites now. And I just picked them apart. I read to study how they worked. I read a few books about screenwriting, the ones that everyone reads, Snyder's Save the Cat. And I think there was John York, Into the Woods. Those were very helpful resources for me. The one thing I learned, and especially if you're transitioning into screenwriting, is that the joy of screenwriting is it's very heavily tied to story structure. And if you understand story structure, then it kind of unlocks screenwriting for you. I know a lot of the courses are expensive and people can't do them for reasons of geography or other things, but I'm a firm believer that you can teach yourself to do it by reading lots of screenplays, and a couple of those books like the one I've mentioned. Sorry, Jazz, I know you went to film school and paid for a whole degree to do this, but I think maybe you would agree that there are ways to learn by doing this on the job as well. And that's, I learned partly by sort of researching as much as I could online and reading. There is no substitute, whatever you want to write, whether it's a novel, a poem, play, a screenplay. The number one thing you need to do, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise, is read as many of those things as you can get your hands on. As many good examples, but also bad examples, because you want examples of what you don't like and what you're not going to do as much as you want examples of what you're going to do. And you can do that. I know lots of friends who are very successful novelists who never did MFAs and do not need to do MFAs. For me, the secret of a degree is it doesn't teach you how to write. It just gives you the discipline and the space and the companionship of your fellow students that gives you a good structure for writing. But you can teach yourself how to write these things. And that's really important for people who can't do a degree to know. And the other way I learned was on the job, because when you write something that goes into production, you very quickly realize that people will want rewrites. They'll want scenes overnight. They'll want you to be on set producing rewrites. And you've got to then just write really quickly. And you will hopefully have figured out the mechanics by then. So it was a trial by fire. But it was, I think I now have I call it my life degree. You know, I've sort of taught myself, and I do now have a screen agent, a very good one. And what I hope is the beginning of a good, successful screenwriting career.
Wow, so exciting. Thank you. So a couple more questions here. I would just say, if anyone wants to say their own question and speak to the camera, I think with Susanna, would you like to ask your question, or would you like me to read it? Sometimes people are logging in from work in situations they can't speak. But Susanna, oh, you've just turned your mic off. Just want to give the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. This is wonderful. Such a treat to be able to join this group. Thank you for arranging. Lovely to hear the inspiration of reading. And I've got 2 young daughters myself. I'd love to hear which authors you admire and what authors you recommend to young women growing up today.
Ooh. So that the last question is going to be tricky for me to answer, because my daughters used to tell me that I was out of touch with all of this, because I really tried hard to get them to read the stuff that I had read, and they had moved on. And in fact, my daughters are all now in their 20s. So I suspect that your daughters, if they're much younger, and it sounds that they are, will be into different things. But what I will say is that there are some classics. So I feel like, at what ages are they?
Sorry, I keep muting because I've got dogs in the house.
Okay, no worries.
Sometimes. 14 and 12.
Yeah, so I feel like I had a kind of series of books that I gave my kids gifts at particular sort of milestone ages, and I felt like these were the books that had been formative for me. But they are all classics, and I do think young people have a kind of strange relationship to classics now. If really bookish kids will still love them and get them, and others might not. But for me, it was, when I was very tiny, it was The Little Match Girl, and then it was Charlotte's Web, and then it was To Kill a Mockingbird, and then it was Pride and Prejudice. And that was like a kind of series of sort of formative reading milestones for me. I think part of it was about the reading, but also part of it was, I was thinking about what kind of people I wanted my kids to be, and I wanted them to be empathetic, to be kind to others, to think really deeply about the world and the meaning of life. And I found that in books. You know, when I was really little, I thought the world, I mean, my background is that my family were Jamaican immigrants to Cayman, and we came to Cayman as a result of severe political violence that affected my dad in particular quite badly in Jamaica. And I was only 4 or 5 years old at the time. So for me, the world did seem like a really kind of scary, unjust, unpredictable place. And I feel like those kind of, especially those formative books, they weren't just an escape, but they were a blueprint for how the world could be kinder and safer and better. I have to say, though, I also did love, and I know my kids, you know, like obviously there's the Harry Potter and stuff, but I also did love what my mom considered junk, like the Sweet Valley High books. I don't know if there's anyone here old enough to have read. There we go. Rita's
I did,
you know, like Sweet Valley High was my jam. And I think my daughters loved Sarah Dessen, which is again that kind of, you know, you're just figuring out what it's like to have a crush on someone. And so I don't know what the equivalent is, sadly, because I'm waiting for grandchildren to be into this kind of age group reading for 12 and 14-year-olds now, but there is always that equivalent. And I think the point is, for some kids, reading is just a great blueprint for life. It sort of, I think, especially if you're growing up in a place where you'd feel like you don't quite fit, or you feel like life is unfair, it really did save my life. And so I hope, I think part of the thing I've learned as a mom is just let the kids read what they want to read, because each of mine got these books, and that, you know, I'm sure they were special to them, but they were just drawn to their own reading anyway. So I hope that is happening and does happen for your daughters also.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you. So we have another question here in the chat I've been asked to read. Nasaria Shalette, thank you for joining us here.
Hi, I can't
You're
see it,
here.
Nasaria, but I'm excited.
Good, good. She says, how difficult was it to let Frannie go, in quotes? Meaning when you start partnering to tell the story through different mediums, some parties have a vested interest and may want to change things that depart from your understanding of who Frannie is. How difficult is that? I imagine you're talking to the screen.
Great question. And Nasaria is a dear friend, and actually Nasaria's work and her husband Randy's work have been huge inspirations to me. I love talking about how one form of art inspires and influences another, and she and I have done that quite a lot together. Letting Frannie go, the question actually links back to the other question about what, you know, my journey into screenwriting and any difficulties I had, because I would say a significant difficulty I had in the process of adapting Frannie for screen was letting her go. And part of that was I didn't really feel safe letting her go. It was this, as you can probably tell, is a very personal book. The themes are very significant for me, but they're also very linked with my identity as a Black woman and as a Caribbean woman. And part of the experience of having the book adapted for screen was allowing it to become something very commercial and really very mass produced. It was not, even though I wrote the screenplays, it was not my vision, because the truth about getting something made, and people on the Zoom who are involved in TV and filmmaking will recognize this, is that it is a collaboration, which means your power over the material is inevitably diluted. It has to be. You've got to accede to a director's vision. You've got to accede to the vision of producers. You've got to accede to the vision of a streamer or a network, as the case might be. And they're not always going to align with yours. I had real difficulty with that. To be honest, I had difficulty with that I have not gotten over yet, because I think it is very, very, very tough to tell certain stories to a mainstream audience. But part of the relief for me was that I was desperate to let Frannie go. That's the truth of it. You know, I talked about how much work this project involved. So it was 5 years of my life. It was a year on the dissertation. It was 2 years writing the novel. It was another 2 years adapting and, you know, being involved in filming and all the rest of it. So by the time it came time to let her go, I felt like, you know, I would look at the book sometimes and say, Frannie, you and I are done with each other. We're just done. I would really like to see other people now, Frannie Langton. And in fact, I found that's what's happened. Finally, you know, as soon as we wrapped on that TV series, as soon as my publicity obligations for it were done, because talking about her does make her seem very real to me, like someone I have lived with, a real person I've lived with. But when that was done, it was the first time I felt able to turn my attention to another project. And that's what I've done. I am writing another novel. I'm in love with a new protagonist, and, you know, I'm all about them now. And it does feel really liberating, even though Frannie will always be part of my life. Even getting ready for this was weird for me, because I'm not often asked to talk about her anymore. And so I had to like go find my copy of the book and, you know, remind myself, oh yeah, we used to have a relationship. So yeah, I think I have let her go now.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's brilliant. Well, we're coming to the end of our first section of this. We do have another question here, but I thought maybe we might invite you to read your second extract, and then go on to Candy's question. Candy, if you'd like to read out your question after the second extract, or I can read it to you, just let me know. And then we've got plenty of time for more discussion and more questions. And I know that Antonia's got lots to ask you as well. So thank you so much. It's so fascinating. I could be here all night. Love it.
So for the second extract, I thought I would go, because we started in London, I thought I would do a bit more Jamaican focused for the second reading. So this is Frannie starting the biological part of her story, where she's this kind of reminds me of Jane Eyre, and Jane Eyre was a huge influence on this novel. And And it's a kind of her Jane Eyre section, you know, when Jane starts with her childhood and talks about how she ended up where she did. I used to be called Frannie Langton before I was taken from Paradise to London and given by Langton as maid to Mr. George Benham, who then gave me to his wife. It wasn't my choice to be brought here, but very little in my life ever was. I was Langton's creature. If I pleased him, I pleased myself. If he said something was to be, it was. But Langton was a man who had named his own house Paradise, despite all that went on there, and named every living thing in Paradise too. What more do I need to tell you about him? Where I come from, there's more than one way a man gives you his name. He marries you or he buys you. In some places, that is the same thing, and they call it a dowry. But it's a truth everybody must savvy, that in some places, a man has no need to marry what he's bought. This isn't going to be the story of all that was done to me at Paradise or of everything I did, but I'll have to include some of it, I suppose. I've always wanted to tell my story, even though one person's story is only a raindrop in an ocean. But if you've ever stood in the sea when rain's coming, then you know there are two different kinds of water. Seawater is nothing like the first cold drop springing fresh on your face, then another on your tongue, then another pat, pat, pat on your closed eyelids until all around you rainwater is slapping at the sea. The difficult thing is to know where to start. My life began with some truly hard things, but my story doesn't have to, even though nothing draws honesty out of you like suffering, the receiving of it, but the giving also. I was born at Paradise, and I was still a small girl when they took me up from the slave quarters to the house. For a long time, I thought that was a stroke of luck, but it was nothing more than the liar's habit of trying to make fact better than truth. Some nights, if Fibba had left the shutters open and the candles lit, I could creep along the river through damp grass, hide behind the sugar mill, gawp at the house. Yellow light shivered at the windows like church glass, and Miss Bella's shadow stretched gray and tall as she drifted past them. I pictured her inside, getting ready for bed, rolling towards Langton, the syrupy way white women move, not like the cabin women who are quick as hens. The house was a sight come morning too, sun shining like Langton's church shoes, heat already gripping my throat, but still a cat's tail of mist. I'd walk the track through the guinea grass up to the front porch. Out in the cane piece, the men waiting for their bowl of mash, lime-washed walls, porch wide as shoulders, the logwood shutters Miss Bella made Manso put up to shut out the bad air. I liked the idea that the house was as new as me. Langton used to brag about making Manso and the hired-on stonemasons and carpenters work like clocks for 3 years, getting it plumb. Then I'd smooth out my brown calico, walk around to the back. Everything, all the way to where the river cut north, black, slow, and mud-clogged, belonged to Langton. I'd sit right on one of Miss Bella's Campeche chairs, listen to the floorboards creak, lift my own arms out of the sun the way I'd seen the white ladies do, push my toes down to set the chair rocking, just close my eyes and wait for the day to crawl towards noon.
Oh, thank you. I was going to begin the second half with the very question that we have next, and that was to ask you about your daily practice, your creative practice, and how you go about writing. Is there a routine? Is there a ritual?
Yes. Before I answer, I just had a message saying my internet connection is unstable, so I hope you guys can all hear me, but yeah, put your hand up if I need to kind of fix that. I love talking about routines and rituals. It's another thing that I do sometimes to comfort myself. I go online looking for opening lines. I go online looking for rejections, famous rejections, because that kind of soothes the soul. And I also go online looking for other writers' routines, because I'm fascinated by them. The first thing that I do is I treat writing like work. And that was something that I had to learn how to do, I guess, because writing is a profession that is so undervalued that a lot of people view it as a hobby. And, even a lot of my loved ones and people in my life will have at times have viewed it as a hobby. And so I think I had to learn to treat it as work. I had to impose the discipline of work on it, which means doing it from 9 to 5, treating it with respect, answering my emails, staying on top of being organized about it. But it also means leaving it behind. So not overworking, trying to find a work-life balance and leaving it alone. So I am very structured about my working day, which is 9 to 5, 6 or 6:30 if I have a deadline. And then I have rituals. I think there are rituals that kind of invoke this Pavlovian response, which what you want to do when you're writing. I ran into Sarah Waters, who wrote Fingersmith the other day. We were both walking. This is going to, I'm bragging now, but we were both walking to Clarence House to meet the Queen on Thursday, as you do. And I ran into her, and she was talking about the fact that she's writing another novel, and everyone has this feeling where you hate the writing when you're doing it. But we were talking about where we write, and she said, like me, she writes in a room at the top of her house, which means that she has to go up a few flights of stairs to get to it. And what she said resonated with me, which is that she's done it so often, this kind of ascending the stairs to go to the writing room, that it's become part of the ritual of writing. So as she is going upstairs, her brain is shifting gears from Sarah doing whatever she's doing in the world to Sarah about to become the writer. And I think there is some truth in that your rituals will flip a switch that turns on a writing brain, that there is a writing brain, and that you engage it. If the more you do your rituals, the more they tell you that brain should be engaged now because it's time for work. And that kind of sets you up. It is preparing whatever part of your subconscious that the good work comes from. But the mistake people make is they think it's either a hobby or it's magic, and you just, that it comes from nowhere. It comes from preparing yourself and then putting in the work, just the hard work of putting some sentences that aren't good on the screen, but knowing that you're sitting there doing that from 9 to 5, and then you've laid out some raw material that you'll be able to edit, revise, improve, and beat into submission. And that's what I've found has worked for me. So I stick really, really, really closely to I become superstitious about my routines. One of my routines is music. I've said this before, but I wrote Frannie. So it was the kind of soundtrack you'd expect, which it was like a lot of classical music, a lot of jazz, but also a lot of, Jay-Z. I call it my hype music. So in the morning before I start writing with my coffee, when I'm just getting ready, I'll play hip hop. It was Jay-Z and it was Kendrick Lamar. So I used to joke that Kendrick Lamar gave me my motto for writing the novel, which was "Bitch, be humble," because that was really the soundtrack to my days. So yeah, it's very important to have structure, and it's very important to think of your writing brain as something that you are trying to engage through consistency, through showing up and sticking with it, even when it doesn't feel like anything is coming out, through hard work and revision, and through having some kind of structure in place.
What about the process of getting to that point to start writing? When I start talking about research, I get a lot of blank faces. What kind of research do you have involved with, English literature or writing? And we all know in this group that there's going to be background research, character research, practice-based research. And I was reading about your mood boards for Frannie. Could you tell us a little bit about your background practice, these mood boards?
Yeah. That's such a good question, because it is part of the work that I think a lot of people don't realize is involved. So what really helped me, I think, was having been a lawyer before, because the one thing you learn as a young associate, especially a litigation associate, is how to research. And this was a very research heavy novel. I did a lot of reading. I've got an author's note where I credit the kind of the source material that I found really helpful. I did a lot of work in the Old Bailey archives, reading. So much of the Old Bailey portion of the novel is based on real archives, real cases from the Old Bailey, and some of the language as well. I did a lot of on-site research. So I visited for example, the former Greenwood plantation in Jamaica. I think it's really important, if you can, and you're writing about a place, especially if it's historical, because it's very hard to picture through this sort of filter of history, to go and stand in the place, to actually feel it, to get a sense of what that must have been like, hundreds of years ago. I also did that in Piccadilly. Luckily, London's history is so well preserved that you can actually sort of strip away all the modern stuff and imagine what it must have been like in Georgian London. So I did a lot of on-site research in London, talking to people. But I did find that the problem with a research-heavy novel is managing the research, because it can overwhelm the story. And so I did find that what I had to do was be really organized about it, keep notes, understand where they were. So I had them all sort of filed by subject, but almost forget about it. Rose Tremaine, who's a very good historical novelist, says that research has to be subsumed. It has to be buried before it makes its way into the text. And I think this is the helpful thing for me anyway about research, is you want to forget it. You want to know it so well that you've absorbed it. And then you want to put it to one side, because you're writing a story about people. And if you're not careful, the research, you just want to show off your research, and it kind of kills the story. So stuff really only came into the novel when it pressed its way in, when it was really essential, because it connected in some electric way to the story, not because I had found it out and therefore I had to put it in there, if that makes sense. I eventually reached a stage where I realized what I had to do actually, if I wanted to get on with the novel, was say, to hell with the research. I've done enough research. It's very easy to use it as a crutch to avoid writing, because it's much easier to look something up than it is to write a story. And writers are always looking for ways to avoid writing. Like procrastination is the number one reason, I think, to continue your research longer than it has to be continued.
On the topic of revision, editing.
Someone says she feels attacked. Is that about research? Sorry, Antonio. I know, me too. Anyway, sorry, Antonio.
The next step would be revision, editing, and anybody who's ever had to take a piece of work and then prepare it knows the heartbreaking feeling of, that you have to kill these darlings. And yes. I thought reading this book, you have to remember that it didn't come looking and feeling like this. And I read that there was an entire section of it around the middle involving France that you were.
Yes, that's true.
Could you tell us about the revision, the editing, killing your darlings, and reaching completion? I think we've got time for just a question.
I would love to. First of all, can I check? Are you hearing me okay? I just want to make sure I'm not breaking up. Okay.
Perfectly.
I want to start by saying, because we started by talking about opening lines. By the way, one of the secrets of narrative, as you'll know, Antonio, is your end, since we're coming to an end, should always kind of loop back to your beginning somehow. So we were talking about opening lines. And I think I can partly illustrate what I want to say about craft by saying that the first line of this novel is the last line I actually wrote. And it's one of the only lines that I didn't edit. It is one of the only lines that the form that it is in the published version of the book is exactly how it came out of my head onto the page. Every other line in this book was wrestled with multiple times, various iterations of it, worked, reworked, and reworked. I would say it's not possible to count how many drafts I did, because I just kept working the lines as I went along, but it would have been, maybe 50, 60 drafts if you were tallying it up. That's how much I reworked every line. And I could only write the beginning after I had a handle on on the novel and how it had actually developed. So the beginning was the last thing that I worked on, and it was only possible for me to do that after I'd gone through the craft of like assembling, working and reworking, trying to find Frannie's voice, trying things that didn't work and discarding them. And then just, so you start at the level of a structural edit yourself when you're looking at the book and you think, is the story working? Is there enough tension? Am I going on too long with this? But then you also are looking at, on a line level, are these sentences effective? Do they feel like the voice of the character? Is there enough tension in the sentences? Do they have an internal rhythm? Even before you get to that, you're thinking, have I overwritten? Are there things that I need to delete in order for the book to come to life? One thing that has stayed with me about this novel, which I didn't appreciate, and it would have saved me a lot of time before I read it, before I wrote it, if I did appreciate this, is that sometimes what you're doing in writing a novel, the most useful thing you're doing is taking away the stuff that doesn't belong, the padding, the baggage, the flabby sentences, the overwriting. You're cutting all of that out. And so, to answer your question about the bit that I had to sacrifice, I spent, I would say 6 months of the 2 years I spent writing this book was spent researching the French Revolution, the aftermath of the French Revolution, and French emigre to London, because Madame, who is the love interest for Frannie in this novel, is the daughter of a French nobleman who flees France post-revolution for England, as many French people did. And I had given her a whole section from Madame's point of view, so her sort of first person section about her story. And my agent, who is brilliant and was absolutely right about this, said to me in our first editorial meeting, that's all got to go. And at first, my initial reaction was a word I won't repeat on this call, because it was 60,000 hard-won words that I had put in, and they were gorgeous, and it was a great story. But she said, trust me, Madame has to remain an enigma for the novel to work. And so I said, my rule about this, and I think it's a good rule when you're being edited by someone else, is even if you recoil from whatever the editorial suggestion is and you think, no, I don't agree with that, just sit with it. So I was like, I'll think about it. I'll take it away. I'll try it. I'm not saying I'll agree to it, but I'll try it. And I took it away. I cut the section and I read the novel without it. And she was right. The novel just came to life. Because she remained an enigma, it left some tension in. What you writers will know is when you cut things, what you're doing is leaving subtext, and subtext is what builds a good book. It's the gorgeous part of any piece of art, is the thing that the reader works out for themselves rather than being spoon-fed it. It reminds me of something Hilary Mantel said, which is that every novel is a triumph of deletion. And in this case, it was true. So it's not just about making sure what you've got is right and then really fine-tuning what you've got. It's also about looking at what you've got and thinking, do I need to whittle this? Usually it's like sculpture. Usually you've put a whole bunch of stuff down, but you've got to cut stuff away, like you're sculpting a piece of marble to get to the real art. Like what's at the heart of the material is what should actually survive once you've done your own editorial process on it.
Well, we're almost done. One more question. Frannie is such an achievement. The first thing I did was to make a list of other protagonists and think of what she might have in common with, and why I couldn't put my finger on what it was so special about her. And what was it? Was it Scarlett O'Hara, Anne Shirley, Bridget Jones, Queenie? And when I realized that she's a Black girl in a Gothic novel. And it took me a long, as many lists as I did make, it didn't come to me. It is an extraordinary book, and I think we're all so happy for you. My last question is, would you tell us about something, and I've only found out about it today, and I was really very moved by it because it's somebody I still remember. Could you tell us something about the Joy Brandon bursary?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I would love to. Actually, I would encourage, if there are people on the call who want to apply. Thank you, Antonio. That's a brilliant way to end. Very quickly, because I know we do have to wrap up. I did my master's in creative writing at Cambridge. And so I have now funded a bursary for a Black Caribbean student or a student of Black Caribbean origin to do the same degree. So it'll be a fully funded 2-year master's at Cambridge. And it's called the Joy Brandon Bursary in honor of my aunt, my dad's sister, who passed away many years ago, but was my first example of somebody, you know, like me from Cayman, you know, from the place we all come from, writing and publishing. So she won the I forget the name of it now, the National Playwriting Award back in the 80s with Lavinia Lee and her sisters, which was put on at the Harquail, and she also published her poems, and she was just a huge inspiration to me. So that's my Aunt Joy Brandon, and it's the Joy Brandon Bursary. There are details available online for students of Black Caribbean origin to apply for the scholarship.
Thank you for that. I only found out a couple of hours ago about that, and I only realized at the same time that that was your aunt. She was the voice of my childhood.
Radio Cayman.
Yeah, I can hear her voice. I close my eyes and hear her voice.
You're gonna make me cry. That's, I mean, it's just it's so special to me. So yeah.
I was shocked by it, and I called Rita and I said, "Oh my God, did you know?" And none of us knew about it. So I thought, that's gonna be my last question.
You know what? I should have actually contacted the Compass or got someone to contact the Compass about this, because it should be advertised at home. I would love it if people from Cayman applied. So yeah.
Well, if you could help us,
get on to that.
You could help us with our marketing, and we would be happy to send out a blitz about that, because I would be very proud of a gesture like that.
Yeah, and I would be really, really proud if a Caymanian student won this scholarship. So
wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you for that reminder. That's a lovely note to end on. I'm really touched. Like, I'm actually feel quite tearful. It's a really lovely reminder of my aunt, who I think was my, you know, like my first kind of writing hero. So
it's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. I thank you, Antonia. I know Antonia had lots probably more to say, as do we all, but we know everyone's time is limited, and we're 2 minutes over. There's a couple more questions. I wonder whether you might...
Oh, someone says they performed a piece from Lavinia Lee last year. Whoever that was, was that Rita? I would love to get... I've been asking for a copy of that script. Anyway, sorry, Kate, I'm taking up all the time.
We're happy to stay. We're conscious of your time, so if you can stay, we're fine. We'd love to stay, but we know you need to go, so it's fine. Just to say, if there were a couple of questions that came in, would you mind answering maybe by email or something a bit later down the line, or perhaps we stay in touch, certainly, about the...
Yes, and I will answer by I'll do video answers and send them in if that's helpful. I don't know if do you have a Facebook group or something that it's just easier than typing out and quicker than typing out answers?
Amazing. Absolutely.
I'm also really happy, although my time is limited, but for any aspiring writers in Cayman who want to ask questions, especially about working with agents or submitting to agents, or, you know, who the good agents are, I'm happy to chat kind of individually about that. And I will be home for a long break from the 12th of December to the end of January, when I will be trying to see Jazz for coffee, because I owe you coffee, Jazz. We couldn't quite connect when you were here. But yeah, so I'm happy to do that as well.
Amazing. And we got that recorded too, so we stick you to that. That's really, these opportunities are so wonderful, and we're so appreciative of you being here, and it's inspiring, and I certainly myself have very much enjoyed it. So just any last thoughts from you, Sara, before we close the meeting?
Oh no, just to say good luck, everybody. As I said, I recognize Jazz, and I am really, really excited to see, and also to learn that Antonio also did a master's, an MFA here. It just fills me with joy to realize that there are lots more Caymanians doing this thing than there were when I grew up wanting to do it, and we have to try and support each other in doing it.
Amazing. Thank you.
So
thank you. So if anyone does want to stay on and have further chat, please feel free to, but we know that a lot of people will need to leave, and I will end the recording now and say thank you to those watching, thank you to those who have come, and a huge thank you to Sara for joining us and spending so much time with us, and to Cayman Connection and the team for putting all of this together. Join book club, join Cayman Connection. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I will exit now then, if you stop the recording, but thank you so much. That was a really lovely, well-organized discussion.